And now in Kenya, what began as a peaceful commemoration has turned deadly. Rights groups say at least 16 people were killed and over 400 were injured after police cracked down on anti-government protests. The demonstrations marked 1 year since protesters stormed parliament, and despite growing fears of violence and intimidation, thousands still took to the streets. For more on this, I'm joined by Nora Mbagathi, Executive Director at Katiba Institute, based in Nairobi. Nora, thank you so much for joining us on the news.
Thank you for having me.
So how is the mood like today in Kenya following the protests that we saw on Wednesday?
To be honest, the mood is it's frustrated and it's also confused, I think. We're seeing the aftermath now of the police brutality that was witnessed yesterday in response to the peaceful protests that had been previously announced as well. And there are reports of more casualties. There are reports of people who should have been arraigned today, protesters who were arrested, who should have been arraigned today, who haven't yet been arraigned. And so I think there is a bit of confusion, but largely that confusion is also spilling over into further frustration for having seen the response that we did yesterday, and then seeing this kind of aftermath, also in terms of the political reaction that we're seeing.
Yeah, so in terms of response, what's your opinion as regards the police actions too during the protests?
I think the police action was outrageous, and personally, I was also really disappointed to see what we saw. There have been clear orders given by the Kenyan courts saying police officers could not, they had to be they couldn't be plain clothes. They had to wear police uniforms. They could not cover their faces. There were clear orders around the use of force and the type of use of force that is not allowed in this kind of peaceful protest context. And so seeing the way the authorities responded was really deeply disappointing, and also suggested that the police did not fully understand that, you shouldn't be obeying unlawful orders. And in fact, you have a personal responsibility that comes to bear if you do so.
Well, they'll probably argue that they are bound by an oath. But then, how are civil society organizations responding to the recent incidents involving unarmed civilians?
Yeah, so first on the oath point, they are bound by an oath, but again, it's not an oath to disobey the law. And so since there had been those clear orders, the police really was obliged to police in a manner that is constitutional and that is in line with the Kenyan constitution, and that is not what we saw yesterday. In terms of how civil society has been reacting, there has been a very strong reaction from civil society, and from people and the protesters themselves. I think already starting yesterday in terms of coordinating around what was happening, recording what was happening, making sure even during a media blackout that people were furnished with information, and that information was recorded correctly. People came together to help the wounded, including the 3 police officers that we know were wounded yesterday as well. And civil society also came together in trying to hold the authorities and government to account for what was happening. My organization, Katiba Institute, together with the Kenya Human Rights Commission, followed the Law Society of Kenya in going to court over the media blackout that had been ordered. We also at Katiba went to court over the barricades that had been erected to prevent the protest from happening. And so civil society has really been coming out in full force. But the problem is of course, what is the response to that, and how do we see the authorities responding to this engagement by civil society?
All right, so some people will say that he's been disappointing, and others will say that he's just a man working under pressure, coming up with harsh economic policies. How would you rate the William Ruto administration when he came into power, and now how his administration is moving?
So I don't think in this context it is actually about rating the administration. It comes back to the pure constitutional rights that we have as Kenyans and as people living in this country. And so, yes, economic times might be tough. There might be all kinds of pressures on a president, I would imagine. But what that never justifies is acting outside the Constitution, right? And acting outside what the law provides. And so I think I would always take it back to the Constitution and say, in a situation like that yesterday, in a situation where we're seeing peaceful protesters, people who want to commemorate those who have died last year, families who want to lay wreaths at Parliament, who find barbed wire on the streets on their way there, after having announced again that they were planning to do so. That is just not acceptable under any circumstances. Regardless what pressures any administration might be facing, we always need to be acting within the confines of the law.
Well, one would hope so. Thank you so much, Nora Mbagathi, for sharing your thoughts with us.